What's up, guys, and welcome to the Level Health Podcast. Today, Josh is interviewing Nina Oljaca. Nina is a dietitian as well as a nutrition, body image, and mindset coach based out of Perth, Australia. Today, we're discussing red flags to look out for when working with clients, fostering a productive mindset for them, the truth about non-compliance, as well as some potentially harmful practices in the industry. We also touch on her opinion of how the dietitian industry can improve, and she makes some really good points that I think we can all agree with. This is one of my favorite episodes that we've done just because she offers so much insight into how we work with clients and our approach to them overall, and kind of how our mindset as health and fitness professionals can shape their experience with us. Big thanks to Nina for coming on our show. You can follow her on Instagram at Nutrition Parlor. She offers online coaching as well as in-person services in Perth. All the details for that are available on her Instagram, which we'll have linked in the description below. For those of you that don't already know, our website, Level Health, is a directory, community, and network of qualified health and fitness professionals. We want to help create a space where clients and patients are able to find the right professional for them. If you haven't already signed up for a membership, head over to levelhealth.net and set up your membership. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode.
I just wanted to start by asking or saying, really, I keep seeing these themes coming time and time again with people from all over the world. We've talked to people from a few different countries already, and the same themes kind of just continue to be perpetuated. And it really is kind of an issue that we aren't addressing very well at all as health and fitness professionals. And when I messaged you, I was thinking, okay, what am I going to ask her? I usually do sit down and I do some research and I look at your social media and everything like that. But right away, you rattle off like 10 things that I really wanted to talk about. And I think that absolutely need to be talked about. But before we get started with those, can you kind of just fill us in on who you are and why you do what you do?
So I'm a dietitian. In Australia, to be a dietitian, you need to be a university qualified nutritionist first, or do a double degree in nutrition and dietetics. So that's really misunderstood. A lot of people like, what's the difference? Difference is that you are, as a dietitian, you're a nutritionist and a dietitian. And a dietitian is also qualified to work in hospitals, for example, so with a health condition, versus a nutritionist, not so much. It's meant to be just a general healthy population kind of advice. So I've done 5 years of university education, and through COVID and everything, I accidentally stumbled into the world of virtual dietetics. Okay, so I actually work in 3 different places, but I'll start with my virtual clinic because that's my baby, which I am absolutely in love with, and that is Nutrition Parlor. And I stumbled across that because I started actually just sharing my own personal story about a year before I started working, about my struggles with body image, having disordered eating, coming from a background of bodybuilding or being interested in becoming a bodybuilder. And then, that took me down some quite turbulent paths, I guess. And then I became really passionate about helping other people overcome the struggles that they have as a result of dieting or too much really intense nutrition advice that people struggle to apply. So there's my baby. I also work in a clinic, so that's just general advice depending on whatever health condition somebody has. And then I also do corporate nutrition, so creating and presenting webinars, doing challenges and things like that. So great big variety in my life, which I love.
Which aspect of that do you enjoy the most? Which do you think that you may do long term?
My business for sure. The virtual dietetics, that's my ultimate goal, is to be doing that full time. And I've already started doing things like webinars in there as well. But I do love my corporate job as well. I don't want to leave just yet.
Very cool. A common theme I do see in your content, and it's something that really stood out to me, was that you talk about your own transformation. So I think that's very cool. And I didn't realize you're coming from kind of the aesthetic, the bodybuilding focused kind of background. I think that a lot of the people that are working against the common themes in the industry are coming from that past themselves, because that's definitely where I came from. It was the only thing that mattered was aesthetics. And, the same thing with you. It took me down some turbulent paths. And I think that we bring that past with us, and really, I think it can absolutely help our clients. And that leads me to my first question. And again, you stole this from you because it was your idea, but I absolutely want to hit on it. So something we keep coming back to is the language we use when we're talking with clients or patients and how that affects them in a positive or negative way. My question for you is, what is the importance of this and how can we improve the way that we speak to the people we work with?
So coming from, let's say, a dietitian perspective, going through the dietetics degree, we're basically taught quite black and white. So this is healthy, this is not so healthy. This is a nutritious everyday food. This is a we call it discretionary food, okay? And this kind of language is kind of the easiest way that we can teach our clients and our children what is preferred and what's not preferred. What can happen over time, especially with social media, especially with all like the access to all the nutrition information you want in the world at the end of your fingertips, is that people start to adopt this language and also actually internalize it into themselves. So if that food is bad and I eat it, therefore I must be bad. If that food is junk, therefore I've done a bad thing by putting junk into my body. And I find that this really actually, for many of my clients, it takes a really long time to basically unlearn these beliefs to the point that they actually feel comfortable and don't feel guilty and start hating themselves for eating those sorts of foods. So language is so, so important. And we need to start to neutralize that. And I sometimes use the terms of, this is in the ideal world, this is what you would have. We don't live in an ideal world. So these are the fun foods that you also add for pleasure, or I talk a lot about the purpose of food and why you eat it. So to get rid of that moral value.
The purpose, I've often said that, like, if we could look at food and really exercise and all of these things in just a completely logical way, it would be so much easier, but that's just not the case. The good food, bad food, I across the board, that seems to be extremely problematic. It also seems to be useful for some people. I think it depends on, like you said, if you internalize that, but how often do you see that being productive and how often do you see it being the opposite?
I think about this a lot, actually, because I feel like there's this really great divide in the industry with like the pro dieting team and the pro aesthetic goals team, and then the negative, the anti-diet team. And I feel like there needs to be a lot more of a coherence between these two sides and recognize that there's a place for both, for different kinds of people. So different strokes for different folks. So I can definitely see how for some people having those really black and white rigid rules is quite helpful for them. And they go, right, someone just told me what to eat, what not to eat, and I thrived, right? But the next thing is like, well, how long did they thrive? How long did they thrive until it turned into a thing, right? You thrive while you're able to do it. But then on the other side, I actually, in the industry that I'm in the niche that I'm in, I'm actually kind of spending my days mopping up the damage of other health professionals all day long, people that have used certain language or framed things in certain ways, and I have to basically mop up that damage and unpack it all. So I guess the long winding answer to your question is it really depends on the person. It really depends how that was taught and what it means to the person as well, like how they're going to use that information. Would you agree as well? Is that what you found?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Even before I realized what I was doing, I felt like I was kind of an apologist for personal trainers because people would come to me and it was expected to be a very, very controversial, like a very difficult relationship, a lot of friction in there because they've been forced to do things, they've been punished by trainers in the past, and that's just not a productive way. Even before I understood how deeply important just being aware of the psychological side of things is, I just inherently knew that was just not a very productive way to go about things.
Yeah, I guess coming down to language, it's really easy to talk about, what's good and bad food-wise, but also the importance of how you respond to quote unquote non-compliance, or how you respond to the client's language. So if they've come into you and they've gone, today I stuffed up this week because I did X, Y, Z, and you've asked them not to do that. If you then come in with the language and you support, like, yes, you've stuffed up, then that again comes back to that moral value. You've done a good thing, you've done a bad thing, even if you don't use those words, versus the language that we pick up our clients use and how the way we respond to it. I'm learning is very, very important. If I go, I've stuffed up, I actually start getting to the point of being like, hey, let's change that language. Going, this week didn't go to plan. These are the reasons why. Let's figure out what's been going on. Rather than it being accusatory, it becomes more curious. Stuffed up, I've done a bad thing. I wonder what happened. It didn't go to plan. A lot more open, explorative.
Because we, as health and fitness professionals across the board, I think that we have all the information that we need to make change with people. Obviously, science is going to continue to evolve, and we have to adapt that approach and our understanding. But if I would just say a question that I'm sure every health and fitness professional has asked themselves: if I give my client all the information that I have, everything that I think that they need to know, why aren't they necessarily able to follow through?
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest mistake a lot of people make at the start, especially, you're fresh, you're shiny and new. The more you learn, you almost feel like you want to prove to people how much you know, and you're kind of just dumping all this information. You're like, wow, they're gonna learn so much from me. You dump it all on them. And what happens is that poor person gets overwhelmed and goes, this is too hard, or now they're thinking about too many different things. And at the end, it ends up in what seems to be non-compliance, but it's actually overwhelm. So I remember when I started, I took non-compliance as almost like a personal thing. Like, what have I done wrong that this person? It started off as a blaming them almost thing. So what have they done wrong with the information I've given them? And then it switched onto what have I done wrong to result in them not complying. Now it's a lot more neutral. It's like, hey, this isn't working for them. Let's figure out what we can do to make it work. And more often than not, poor compliance does nothing to do with someone's will or desire to be compliant. It's got to do with the goal isn't important enough for them. Like, you haven't hit the why. They're doing it just because they think they should, or what you've asked them to do is either too hard, they don't understand why they're doing it, or whatever. There's so many different things that can be going on.
So many times I felt like at some point you kind of just like release the blame. You kind of just, okay, I gave them all of the information. If they don't make this change, they don't make it. It's they're not ready. I never even thought that someone would be coming to hire like a trainer, and just really wasn't ready to change. And just understanding how to identify where they're at in that progression model, that transformation model. Gosh, that would have been so useful for me 10 years ago. It just understanding that kind of stuff. And you talked about overwhelm and blame. What are some signs that the client that we're working with may be starting to, or just be deeply in overwhelm?
I guess I would say it really depends on what part of the journey they're in. So I'm thinking about in the framework of when I'm working with clients, I work with them long-term in a package, for example. So if at the start, I always check in with them actually. I'm always like, how are you feeling about doing this? And often they'll say, yeah, great, but I can pick up on their body language. If they're like shifting around, and I start to ask them on a scale, like a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you're going to get to next week and actually get this done? And then I probe around that. If they go, oh, I'm a 7, I'm like, well, why isn't it an 8? And then that's when you get all their fears coming out that you can start to talk about. And then you respond to that. For some people, it's, all right, let's make this goal a little bit easier. For some people, it's like, let's challenge yourself to do this and see what happens. Or just reassuring them that if they don't do it, they're not going to get in trouble. That can be really helpful for some people. But I guess further down the track, it just comes down to like, they almost start to get a bit disinterested, or they want to keep postponing appointments because they're worried about letting you down. You've had that relationship. And that's when you start to pick up on those more subtle signs of overwhelm. And you're like, something's not quite right. And you've got to bring it back to basics for them and see how they respond.
The change ruler, is that what you would call that 1 to 10? How far?
Yeah, so it's kind of a scaling question. It's part of the few different therapeutic techniques use it, but motivational interviewing in particular, which I find really, really helpful, just gets you more of an idea of what's going on in their head. So many people would just be like, yep, everything's fine, but it's not.
Exactly. That seems, I wanted to talk about that specifically from someone, because I've read multiple motivational interviewing books. The change ruler seems like an incredibly effective tool. How have you seen that work? Because like you said, if they say 7, you could almost do that at any point, like whatever, no matter what they say, why didn't you say this? And then they start investigating themselves. So have you found that to be an effective tool?
It was one of those tools that when I learned about it, I was like, there's no way that I can just naturally insert this. It feels so fake and clunky. And I just kind of avoided it for a little while. And I started reincorporating it in a sales tactic. So during the sales call, I kind of get to the end and I'm like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that this is what you need? And I saw how impactful it was at clients actually convincing themselves that this is what they needed. And I was like, right, I'm going to start to actually use this more within like a goal that I'm setting with the client. And oh my gosh, the difference it makes is huge. You really get to see where they're at, and they start to talk about things that they wouldn't normally say unless you ask the perfect question, right? Helps them get all of their doubts out. I also think it's really great for, I don't know about you, but I'm the sort of person that if somebody tells me to do something, my first go is I'm going to tell you all the reasons why I can't do it. And if you argue with me every one of those reasons and don't validate them, I'm not going to ever go through and do the thing. So you can just sit there and validate it. Yeah, it is going to be hard. Yeah, you are going to have to change this. Yeah, that does suck. You have to sit there and validate, and you kind of go through and validate all of their reasons why they shouldn't do it. And then you get to the end and being like, well, but you do want to do it. So what's your plan? And then they start talking about all the reasons they do want it. Yeah, I'm going to do it because I really want this, and I know it's important, and blah, blah, blah. And then they convince themselves they want to do it. So they end on a high note and ready to go.
I would like to touch on something about that real quick. Just within these conversations that you're having, it could be with somebody that you've worked with for a long time. It could be at just the initial consultation. What is some of the language that the client, the patient, client or patient will use to indicate whether or not they're ready to change or not?
This is a tough one.
I think it's going to be different for every single person you talk to, for sure.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do is, specifically, I'm doing this all selfishly to try to help personal trainers as well. But just basically, what would be some things that would be a red flag? I want to talk about red flags later, like just in general behaviors and things like that. But what would be some flags that would say, maybe they're just not ready. Maybe they're not ready to actually make this change, because like you said, the body language could give it away, the change ruler could give it away, things like that. But they may be arguing for keeping things the same. They may then, like, if you're good at motivational interviewing, they may end up arguing for actually making that change.
Again, I find that's really tricky because everybody is so different. And for one person, a red flag means that they're not ready. Another person, the red flag is that they just need some support. So for example, a common one that comes up is like, I don't trust that I'm going to be able to do it. So for one person, that might mean, I don't think I'm going to be able to do it because I don't really want to do it and I'm not ready to. But for another person, that means I've tried something so many times and I've failed so many times that I've lost trust in myself. And so then I have to work with that person to rebuild that trust. And really, if I feel like somebody's not ready and I can get that vibe, I'm trying to think of exact phrases that would give me a really clear indication.
But now that we're talking about it, there may not be, like you said, there may just be ones that you maybe necessarily need to dig into a little bit more, because like you said, everybody's going to be so incredibly different. And one statement from this person could just be a small obstacle that they're perceiving, and the other one could be an enormous obstacle. And again, it just comes down to getting time with people, I think, having conversations with them.
I've just thought of something that can be a really good sign, or like an easy indicator, is if you're sensing a little bit of resistance or hesitation and you go, okay, should we make the goal smaller, or are you happy to keep it as it is? And if they jump on that smaller goal, they're not quite ready, like they're scared and they don't want to do it. But sometimes they'll have all these doubts come up and you go, should we make the goal a bit smaller and see what happens? And they're like, no, I want to do this. And I guess sometimes that's the word you're looking for. If they're using the word I want to about not weight loss, because that's different. I want to, achieve the thing that we're setting out to do, then that's a sign that they're more likely to. If they're going, or I think I can, or maybe, or I don't know, it's actually really quite tough now. Like the more I talk it out loud, I'm like, no, it doesn't even work that way, does it?
The I want, the beginning to argue for that, but we can transition to another point that I want to touch on that then. The alternate routes, like something that I see is that dichotomous thinking, that pass or fail. And I see that, I don't know so much from a dietitian perspective, even from a nutritionist perspective, but from a personal trainer perspective. Like I know I've seen it within workouts, trainers not being able to create an alternative, but then also within programs and goals. Like you said, weight loss may not be appropriate for some people. It just seems like there is that dichotomous thinking across the board. Is that an issue within the dietitian industry?
Absolutely. That all or nothing thinking is literally makes or breaks people. And that is one of the core things that basically I have to help my clients overcome for them to be able to get to the end of our program and achieve what they want to achieve. That is the core foundation of what I'm basically trying to overcome with them. And I always talk about it in can we find a gray area? So I'm literally going, what is gray for you? And I always give them ranges. I'm like, at the bare minimum, let's aim for this target. If you get this target, you are successful. And I make it so small that it's almost ridiculous to not do it. And then I go, but in an ideal world, we're aiming for this target. So it's always a range. And I'm teaching them there's a gray area that there is success, even if it's not the best thing that you want it to do. That sort of makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense, because we set people up for failure that way, and not just like big grand failures, but those little failures that eat away at their self-confidence and their self-efficacy. It's just not a good way to do really anything. And I'm curious, and obviously you don't have to go too in depth here, but why is that the case I kind of get it in the personal training industry, because it's not, the barrier to entry is not very high. And there are obviously amazing trainers, but there are just as many not so amazing trainers. Within the dietitian space, however, correct me if I'm wrong, most dietitians probably work with everyday people. They're not working with athletes that need to have that dichotomy. They're working with everyday people for the most part. Why is that thinking? It just seems even more inappropriate for just the average population. Why is that the case within the dietitian space? Why is it this just complete lack of appreciation for the importance of building that self-efficacy?
The biggest thing that I see that comes of a negative, and I know this will definitely be in the fitness space as well, is if you've got that dichotomous thinking, that black and white, it's either I've succeeded or I've not. This is either good or it's bad, for example. It means that there is room for, like, you get to Tuesday and you've quote unquote stuffed up your diet, and then you end up going, what the hell, throwing it all out the window and either spiraling for the rest of that night and going on a binge. This is what I see really often with my clients, is they go, well, I've stuffed it, I've done a bad thing, I may as well continue, I've wiped out this day. I'll start again tomorrow, or I'll start again on Monday, which is called the Last Supper effect, or most people would know it's like the what the hell effect. So that, I guess that's one of the big, especially for my clientele, where they think they've stuffed up, so they go, what's the point, and they stop trying. But I suppose I guess in athletes, even with bodybuilding, let's say athletes they rely a lot more on willpower, so they can kind of I don't know, that they're just bred differently. Their brains just work differently, right? So for them, let me have a think about how I'm going to say this. So for athletes, for example, it's like they stuff up, they probably beat themselves up to the point of like basically re-motivating themselves. They seem to have this mentality of being able to really push themselves, versus non-athletes, I would find that rather than going, like when they stuff up, it's just going to keep going and going. It's really hard to get back on that horse, because if you're beating yourself up for making a mistake, it's hard to remotivate yourself. That's when, emotional eating comes into play, and stress and poor coping strategies usually result in making poor food choices as well. Is that kind of answering your question? Is that what you're asking?
Absolutely. Basically what I was, you definitely covered it, but one thing I wanted to touch on a little bit was, why do dietitians, do they feel it's appropriate to still maintain that when they're working with the average person? Because you're right, you mentioned willpower, and athletes definitely have more willpower than the average person. But what have you seen in terms of willpower? Like, how effective is relying on willpower for the average person?
Okay, so for the average person, I always say willpower is you just can't rely on willpower, right? It's not an infinite resource. It comes and it goes, and you need to be able to rely on things like habits and things that are convenient and easy. So now, the thing with dietitians that a lot of dietitians don't realize, and same with PTs, is that we are the crazy 1% that gives a crap about food a lot. And it's not that other people don't give a crap. It's like we care so much that we've dedicated our entire life to learning about it. So I think what sometimes happens is they actually forget that for the average person, when you just go, I'll just add some veggies to it, it's not so simple, right? It's just saying to them, like, sometimes I see the things that dietitians say to people, and they're like, fast food is not so good for you. You should make more home cooked meals. I'm like, that is garbage advice. No one in the history of the world thinks that fast food isn't not ideal and thinks that, doesn't think that home cooked meals is better. They know that. But because dietitians basically live in this world of like, all they need to do is know and then they'll do it, they don't realize that normal people are not intrinsically motivated by health even. For some people are just not motivated by health, and that's okay. Some people are just not motivated by weight, and that's okay. It's really needing to get down to the how can we make this as easy as possible for them and meet them at where they're at. Because dietitians are like, how hard is it just to eat a big salad with your lunch and a big salad with your dinner? Because they like salad. I don't like salad. I'm a dietitian. I don't like salad. And so I get it. When my clients come in and they're like, I don't want to meal prep. I'm like, neither do I. I get it. I can think of nothing worse than meal prepping. I'm going to find them meals that take them 10 minutes to make. They're getting a takeaway 5 days a week. I'm not going to ask them to cook meals at home 5 days a week. I'm going to ask them to find a healthier takeaway they still like and cook 1 or 2 10-minute meals in the week as well. So dietitians and PTs as well, we live in our own, we're basically in that highly will-powered athlete zone. And we don't realize that quote unquote normal people just don't do that. I don't know how to explain that.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's so hard though to separate from like, oh, I love fitness, I love nutrition, I'm thinking about food all the time, but it's not the case. I mean, like you said, people work 5 days a week. Like, I mean, and by no means are we calling people out at all, but I think it's important to address that, like across industries, there's just it's become a little less focused on the client and the person that you're working with, and and then there could be the extreme where they're like a low carb dietitian and everything that they go through is low carb. It's like, well, you've kind of missed the boat immediately. I wanted to ask you though, being able to work with people, like you said, making easiest thing possible, set the goal as low as you possibly can so they can achieve it and build that confidence. Are there any non-negotiables, however? Are there any that obviously you can't, if somebody can't do something, like they can't do something, you can't force them to do it, or they don't want to do something. But are there any in your mind, or do you consider anything to be like a non-negotiable in terms of nutrition, lifestyle, just recovery, things like that?
So when it comes to, I always go bring it back to basics. Number one, you need to be drinking enough water, right? Non-negotiable. Making sure you're getting as much sleep as possible, non-negotiable. The thing that I give across the board to pretty much all of my clients, no matter where they're from, and not every dietitian works like this, but my thing is like, you just need regular balanced meals, which sounds really boring from a dietitian. But what that means for many clients, you just say that and something clicks in their head, where I'm like, we're going to try and aim for ideal blood sugar control if we can. So that means regular balanced meals. That means eating every 3 to 5 hours to start with, just to see how they're going. And that means that every meal, see if you can have a bit of protein, a bit of carbs, a bit of fat, a bit of fiber. And as they start to make their meal combinations like that, they start to understand nutrition and they start to see how their appetite is impacted. They start to see their energy levels improve. And when you can start getting that baseline, then they start wanting to exercise. Then they start wanting to add variety. Then they start wanting to experiment. How much longer can I go without eating without getting super, super hungry and then binging, for example, in my niche. So that's kind of like my core that I try to get everyone to start with, especially in my niche where I'm working with people that binge eat and overeat. I need to make sure that you're well fed and not hungry, and then we can't blame blood sugar or a lack of a certain macronutrient or micronutrient for whatever issues you're having with food. Those are my main, so mainly the basics and those regular balance meals.
It's pretty boring, isn't it? And that's when it can be difficult, I could imagine, because I mean, with personal training, it's the basics that matter the most. It's doing the thing that's going to give you the most bang for your buck, especially if you're working with an average person. They're not going to be in the gym for 6-7 days a week for 2 hours each session. Like they're going to be in there for 20-30 minutes, after work on the way home. Like they need to get the most bang for their buck. So it really does come back down to those basics. And this next question is going to hurt me a little bit. As much as it pains me to say, it's not a secret that the fitness industry just really hasn't done a very good job of promoting healthy habits around food. Can you fill us in on exactly what is diet culture and how the fitness industry has kind of normalized some less than ideal behaviors around it?
Okay, so I'm going to use my own personal, I guess, story here. So I'll give a little bit of a background here. So my interest in nutrition came from fitness world. So I started getting into the gym. I was like, love this, love seeing the results, started like, love the consistency, etc. And then I was like, maybe I could step on stage one day. So I started doing all the bodybuilding stuff. And in the fitness world, especially, what we now like what I now reflect on is essentially it's a socially accepted eating disorder. And this is going to ruffle a lot of feathers, okay? Because I know some people live on the camp of like, oh, it's just dedication, it's just a motivation you just don't understand, or just because you weren't, this is what I'll get, just because you weren't able to do it doesn't mean that it's, you know, a bad thing. So when I'm talking about socially accepted eating disorder, I'm talking about there's a whole culture of people who openly talk about red flags as if it's normal. So they openly talk about, you know, I had a big, you know, had a hashtag, you know, had a cheat meal, which is basically a socially accepted binge. So they stuff, you know, undereat during the week to meet their aesthetic goals, and they give themselves a cheat meal where they overeat a whole heap of food, and it, yeah, socially accepted binge. And they talk about that and they laugh about it.
It becomes the main thing for the entire week.
Exactly, it's all everyone talks about. And I had an interview with somebody recently, and we were basically saying people in the fitness culture and dietitians and nutrition as well, all they want to do is talk about food, usually because they're hungry and deprived. So it's their brain is literally geared to be obsessed and think about food so much because that's what, yeah, they're literally underfueling themselves, and that's the way their brain is then geared for. So what I often find is, yeah, so things like that, also things like even the discussions like being forever small, you know, those sorts of phrases, especially in the bodybuilding culture, it's basically normalizing body dysmorphia. You get these guys that are huge and jacked and ripped and they look incredible, and they're jokingly, openly talking about being forever small and being too skinny, and then talking about needing to go on steroids and things like that, because they just can't visibly see how, you know, how great they're looking. They're in the top 1%, but they're comparing themselves to, you know, well, depending on what realm you're in, you're either comparing yourself to Ronnie Coleman, that's his life. You can't compare to that, or like Ziz, or, you know, and you know what these people are doing. Their whole life revolves around the gym. Also things like burning off calories, like needing to earn your treats. Like, girls will be on the treadmill, like, oh, I ate so bad on the weekend, I need to burn it off. Or skipping meals. A lot of people will say they're intermittent fasting because, you know, for health reasons, but the reality is it's almost they're trying to find a culturally or socially accepted reason to not eat with people, right? So all these just like little sneaky things that just float around and become a big culture in the gym that they don't, when you're in that gym bubble, you don't realize is quite disordered. And if you're not in that 1% of people that's really dedicated and motivated, and your brain just works that way where you just love that stuff, people that pass in and out of that gym culture, it's basically like they're flowing, they're coming in, they basically get, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? They get this major influence of them thinking like, I'm not good enough for this, I'm really struggling. Then they leave and they just leave a mess behind, basically. So a lot of the people that I've worked with, I'm like, so where did this start? When did you realize you started feeling XYZ about yourself and your food? Oh, when I started working with this personal trainer, when I started with this gym, when I started with XYZ. I'm not blaming the personal trainer per se. Personal trainers doing what they think is best. They go, well, this is what I eat. I'm motivated. It's really easy to eat this way. Why can't you do it? And then they blame that person. Dietitians do it too. Give them here's a cookie cutter plan. You do this, and if you can't do it, it's your fault. If you struggle with eating well except for a cheat meal a week, that's your willpower. You know, that sort of environment.
The rates of disordered eating in physique athletes and bodybuilders. I just did a podcast with Eric Helms, and he did a paper, and we talked about this a little bit. But the rates of disordered eating and actual eating disorders in physique athletes and bodybuilders, and again, it's like, did people that have those tendencies already become, you know, get into that field, or did it, you know, which one came first? The binge and the cheat meals and the post show, that's the one I see a lot. And I understand the celebration afterwards. That's awesome. I appreciate that you worked hard. However, that may just be really kicking off that post-show cycle that you're going to do on a bad foot, because it's now you have built up this anticipation over the course of 12 to 20 weeks, and now this is the event that you have your show, but it's not really about the show. Like, it's about the cookies, the crazy meals afterwards, all that stuff. So I think that it's these kind of behaviors are kind of baked into the fitness industry. And you're right, it does happen with trainers a lot. In Australia, are personal trainers allowed to give meal plans? Is that a
Look, they're not supposed to. I started my personal training course online, and basically we're constantly told over and over again, the nutrition, you're only meant to align with Australian dietary guidelines, and you're always meant to refer to a dietitian if somebody needs or wants something outside of that. But there are so many personal trainers that give out meal plans, that tell people to go on low carb diets, that tell people to do all sorts of things that even, you know, dietitians find difficult to do with people as well. And the reason, and I totally get it, because before I started studying nutrition, I was Googling nutrition and I was reading and I was researching, and I thought I knew it all. I was telling everyone that would listen, they should go on the keto diet. You should do this diet. This is what you should be doing. And it basically falls under that Dunning-Kruger effect. When you know a little bit and you know more than your clients, but you don't know enough to realize the whole context of the information you're giving, you feel like you know everything.
You just have to keep digging. You have to keep digging until you realize you hit, at some point, I've talked about this with so many people, at some point you hit that level where you're like, oh my goodness, I'm just glad that I didn't screw anybody up, because exactly like you think that because you have some information, and it gets dangerous because people feed into that. It's so dangerous to get into this echo chamber where you're at a local gym and you get a little bit of reputation, and I'm speaking from personal experience here, and you start to think that you are almost like irreproachable, like to the point where you start to do things that are definitely borderline out of your scope of practice. But I think what's one of the most important things is to just keep digging and really gain an appreciation for just how complex human nutrition is. And then you'll start to see, okay, there are people that are much more qualified than I am. And oftentimes, the information's out there, like, for whatever their flaws in Australia and the United States, our government put out guidelines, and, you know, for whatever their flaws, they are okay. Like, they're probably better than what you're going to do, because they had people with more experience and more qualifications. And so if you stick with those and, you know, find a network, and this is kind of actually what we're trying to do with Level, is create this network where people can know that the dietitian that they network with is qualified, that the physical therapist and everything like that, so that we can kind of reach through industries and not try to take on everything ourselves. But I think sometimes you might be a little nervous to, you know, as a personal trainer, for instance, I would have been nervous to send somebody to a nutritionist or a dietitian, because I would have thought, okay, they're not going to come, they're going to think that I don't know everything. And then the little house of cards just kind of falls down. And
that's so true.
This is something, this next question is something that right along these lines that I wish I would have known better at the time. So how do we know if it is not appropriate for someone to focus on a weight loss goal? And if that's the case, how do we get them to focus on something else?
So I would really say, for across the board, ideally weight loss, it can be like an overarching goal, but weight loss in itself shouldn't be the main goal. And I'm not saying this in a way of like a biasing, no one should be aiming to lose weight. I'm going to tell you why I say this. It's because weight loss as a goal intrinsically just doesn't work well for our dopamine reward system. It's like Russian roulette with the scales, right?
Yes.
Because you might do all the right things in a week. You might be doing all the exercises, eating all the right foods, and you might step on the scales and you're waiting for that dopamine hit. So you're waiting for that reward, and you step on it and they've stayed the same for whatever reason, or maybe they've even gone up for whatever reason.
Or the scale's just wrong.
Yeah, or the scale's just wrong, right? So it basically screws up your dopamine system. You've gone, I was waiting all this time to get this reward to tell me I've achieved my goal, the weight thing, and I didn't get it. So what can happen for some people, they become demotivated. They might go, well, I've stepped on the scale, I didn't get the results. And they go, well, crap, what's the point? And it demotivates. I see this really often. or they step on the scale and it becomes almost like an addiction, stepping on the scale, because of that Russian roulette thing. You never know if you're going to get, it's like the slot machines. You don't know if it's going to go up or down or whatever. You don't know how much of a dopamine you're going to get hit with. And that in itself is addictive. It's why people stay in abusive, narcissistic relationships. You get those really inconsistent hits of dopamine and like a nice comment here and there. On the other hand, behavior-based goals, so how often did you exercise? How often did you have, a serve of vegetables with your lunch? These are entirely in their control. They either did it and they get the dopamine reward, or they didn't. There's no weird inconsistency of dopamine. And it's also like, if they're not doing it, they don't get the reward. It sucks. They want that reward. They want to do it to get that dopamine versus, and then if they do it, they get that reward as well, which is why it's also important with health behavior goals to start so small. Because if the moment they're not getting that reward, they're not getting anything that's driving them and keeping them going. Okay, you want to, when you're setting goals with your clients, literally work with their internalized reward motivation system, which is dopamine. How many times in a day can I get them to get dopamine from doing the thing that's going to lead them towards their ultimate goal, which might be weight loss, for example. So that's my biggest thought around weight-based goals. I think it's just not rewarding enough. And eventually, do you know what else? Eventually it's going to go away. That's the big thing. If you reach your goal weight, where are you getting your dopamine from? How do people feel when they reach their goal weight? Lost, purposeless, right? Yes. But if it's a behavior-based goal, you keep doing those behaviors, keep getting the reward, still doing well.
I find it so interesting when we can narrow it down. Obviously, we don't want to be too reductionist, but when we can look at these neurophysiological reward mechanisms and like, how can we use this? It's just so interesting that we're at that point where we actually know the little that we do know about the brain, but that we know enough to be able to do that. What are some other metrics that you would use? What are some other goalposts? Obviously, it's going to depend on the person, but I'd imagine there are some that you kind of, you'd like to use often.
So in the industry that I'm working in, the niche, so the overcoming binging, emotional eating, things like that, we collect food freedom wins. And they sound really silly, but any tiny small win that gets them in the right direction. Quite often, the people that I work with can have like low level, almost like be dopamine junkies, because food gives you that dopamine. And for whatever reason in their life, let's say they're not coping or they don't have anything else that's giving them pleasure or joy in their life, i.e. dopamine, they become addicted to getting it from food. So we need to get it from as many different places as possible, right? So I literally reward everything. You noticed, like, even mental thing, you noticed that when you wait half an hour later after lunch that you finish your lunch and don't feel satisfied. That's a win. Collecting information is a win. This week you did 3 things just for you that had nothing to do with fitness or sleep or health or whatever. That's a win. So because that's also going to give them dopamine as well. So start collecting rewards and wins from things that don't always have to be productive or getting them towards their massive overarching goal, because satisfaction and happiness in life is also important. So I guess I could rattle some off for you. So obviously there's the nutrition wins. Like I ate breakfast 5 times this week consistently. I had a vegetable in my lunch 5 times this week. I only got takeaway once this week instead of 3, for example. Those are the really basic ones. Then it's like I drank enough water. I got an extra 30 minutes of sleep. I had a nighttime routine. Literally anything that you can capture that person is doing, even if they're already doing it. You know how like if you have a to-do list and if you do something it's not on your list, you can write it down, cross it off and get that hit of dopamine, right? Feels good to cross off that thing off the list. Feels so good, right? Any little thing that you can do to give them that, roll with it, write it down, tell them it's a great thing, tick it. Tick just whatever you can find. That's how I work with my clients, and it works really well.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that does that, because there's no need for it to go on the list. You've done it, but you want to write it down there so you can feel it.
Yeah.
And then I also have the other end where if my to-do list is not checked off at the end of the day, it stresses me out. So that's the other side of that relationship. But I think that the way that you talked about that really speaks to the fact that this is about so much more than the food that you eat. Like it goes so much deeper, to the point where like I don't want to be too reductionist, but the food is almost the least important side of things for a lot of people. I find that very, very interesting. So
I always like to say food is not the problem, food is the solution, and you need to figure out what the problem is.
That's awesome. On the note of problems and solutions, the last question I have for you, how do you feel that your industry can improve overall?
Where do I start? So I guess I would love to see my industry advocate for itself a bit better. So there's a big misunderstanding of what a dietitian is and does, and a very small scope, and it's getting better, don't get me wrong, but a very small scope of, even when we're being taught dietetics, it's very much a, here is what healthy is, this is what you tell your clients to do. Every condition has a diet, right? And as a result, what happens, people go and see a dietitian, they get a fresh new dietitian, for example, and they go, here's your cookie cutter solution to your problem. That person goes away, never does it, because that wasn't the problem in the first place, it was something else. And then they never see a dietitian again, they go, it wasn't helpful. I get it all the time. People come to me, I saw this dietitian, they told me this, didn't do it, okay? So we need to really, as an industry, learn more about how to advocate for what we do. So we're not the just diet police. Advocate for the fact that you need multiple sessions with us to get fulfilling outcomes. So we can actually really dig deep into the why. Why is this important to you? Why aren't you doing it? How can we make it easy for you? And then to also advocate for the fact that, you know, every dietitian is different. Everyone has a different niche. So I guess to add on that, what really needs to be taught in dietetics as an industry is a lot more counseling and therapeutic techniques, a lot more motivational interviewing. Such a small component of what I do has anything to do with food, okay? We need to learn so much more about working with people, listening to people, you know, making those small little changes, motivating them, those sorts of things. So, and then being able to advocate for that and explain to people that that's what it is and that's what we do, because everyone's like, we can just Google it. One more thing I wanted to say really quickly was testimonials. As dietitians, we are not allowed to use testimonials. We're not allowed to say that we can get a client an outcome, because we can't promise that. And I totally get that. But what that does is that's leaving us for basically, people don't go to dietitians because we're not proving that we can give, we don't have that social proof. Social proof is so important. It's part of the social cognitive theory of behavior change. If you can't see other people are doing it, you yourself don't believe that you can do it. So we're missing out on that really important component. But people who aren't qualified, so in Australia, nutritionists, naturopaths are not protected titles. Anyone can call themselves a nutritionist or a naturopath, and they can use testimonials. So we're competing with that. And it really is a huge disservice to dietitians, trying to compete with all that noise of people saying all sorts of really sexy, fun messages, promising all this amazing stuff, while we're just going, eat regular balanced meals. Really boring, really unsexy, right? And that's what we have to try and do. It's, yeah, that, I get that.
Since you brought it up, how do you feel, what is your opinion on before and after pictures? Because this is something that I have recently really became, not, I would say opposed for, because it can be, I don't know that I've seen it done in a productive manner. So like you said, the testimonials, I think that problem still, like you said, the nutritionists and the naturopaths, I'm sure that they're blasting out weight loss transformations and things like that, and you're not allowed to. So what is your opinion on that?
Really against them, in so many different ways. So against them in the sense that, you know, it's giving false hope that everyone's going to get those results. Against them in the sense that it doesn't show you the after, because, you know, majority of people, sure, the weight loss is easy. Losing weight the first time is so easy. You just need a bit of support, right? What comes after is the weight gain. How do you deal with that? And, you know, then trying to re-lose it again, it's much harder, because your brain goes, didn't like that. I had to do it for a long time. Not enough reward system. I had to wait 6 months to get my big dopamine hit, right? So there's that. Then there's also the aspect of showing somebody that their before was undesirable, and a variety of people are looking at it, they're going, well, that's me. And what if their before is their after? And they're going, well, that's my after, and they're saying it's a bad thing. So that's perpetuating that message as well, that thinner is better, and some types of bodies are not desirable, others are. Yeah, and besides, everyone's body is different as well. So it's like, even if two people did lose the same amount of weight, it's going to look different on them. People carry weight differently as well. So it's, yeah, I'm just very, very against it, even in other ways, even in the, look, all bodies slouch and all bodies have like a little belly pouch, whatever, because that also is doing the same thing, because somebody's looking like this thin girl who's like slouching over, showing her belly, like, look at my little pooch, all bodies wobble. But then there's a person who's, 50 kilos above them looking at that going, well, cool, good for you, lady. Like, I look like that when I'm not even trying to. And I was like, you're so brave for showing your tiny little roll. So you can, there's so many layers to why I'm not into it.
I see those, and I really do. All of those, I cringe, because, like you said, look at me. I have, all of us have roles, but that seems so self-serving, and again, not productive at all for anybody. Because, like you said, somebody's that's 50 pounds more than them. Like, I would love to look like that. I would absolutely love to look like that, or they feel like that's what they need to look like, and it just seems like it's just another way that they're trying to either perpetuate something. And I hope that it's not always malicious, but sometimes I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But all right, Nina, this was a fantastic conversation. I'm just so incredibly grateful that I get to talk with people like you, and that we're getting to talk with people like you, because this seems like a little bit of a renaissance. I'm a little bit hopeful. I think that these industries in general are kind of charted a little bit of a new course, because people like you are talking, like everybody that I've spoken with so far has pretty similar ideas on what the next step for these spaces are. And I think that people like you are going to be the ones that are kind of leading the way. So it was awesome talking to you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been my absolute pleasure. And you're right. I feel like we're going in the right direction. It's just little baby steps. And I also know that, there's always going to be that dieting industry that we're just going to not be able to battle with. It's just always going to be there. It's just about making the masses more aware of what's going on so that they don't get sucked in.